a tropical paradise along the equatorial belt. Comprising an astounding string of 17,000 plus islands. Bounded by 2 oceans. Home to abundant sea life, Indonesia is the epicenter of marine biodiversity. Professional dive operators providing international standard gear and services, supported by a highly experienced dive staff. Endless underwater gems waiting to be discovered. Boasting hundreds of stunning dive sites, catering to divers of all levels. Dive breathtaking drop-offs and explore old shipwrecks and countless variety of macro life. Comfortable and friendly dive resorts and liveaboards. For exciting diving in various parts of Indonesia. An underwater sanctuary for some of the most remarkable creatures. An extraordinary display of marine life amongst our renowned national marine parks. However, vast areas are yet to be explored by divers. The heart of the world's Coral Triangle Center. Home to over a quarter of the world's marine life. With more than 600 species of coral and over 3,000 fish species. A spectacular aquatic biosphere. Unlimited underwater adventure. Diving beyond imagination. Wonderful Indonesia.
A united journey isn't just about miles traveled, but milestones reached. That turns window seats into breathtaking views. We're sharing smiles, experiences, and connections transcend language and culture. You realize you're not traveling to get away, but to get closer to yourself. Because it is travel that helps us discover that we are all more alike than we are different. And that this journey is just beginning.
Sick.
Connecting people, uniting the world.
Today, I woke up below the surface, where I learned to face my fears and go with the flow. But it's when I came to appreciate the big and the small, made new friends from all over, and could no longer hide my true colors, that I knew I'd emerged a local.
Makalibay, no?
Hello, my dear friends. It's been a while since your last visit, but I want you to know I'm here. Here for you now and in better days ahead. Things may have slowed in your world, but it's anything but slow here. My reefs teem with colorful fish. Schooling hammerheads circle the deep. Playful dolphins roam the shallows. And gentle waves whisper, "Come back to me." I know you're spending hours dreaming of my underwater forest, of my soaring eagle rays, of my wise giant leatherback turtles, of my playful and friendly lions, of the stars that shine below, and the serenading humpback singing. And just as you are resetting, so am I. Everything is more vivid, more plentiful, brighter. I'll continue to surprise you more than ever before. We're always connecting, you and I. In me, you seek solace. And I promise to heal you and delight you. My creatures are calling. A new adventure is waiting. I'll see you soon.
Peaceful sleep is ever there in a blue that lies beneath. He can sense his spirit and like a feather tail.
Our island is a gift that we have shared with the world. But in the stillness of today, our island is asking everyone to give us a moment. To be with our family, Ifamagonte, our children, our grandchildren,
Well, I know Master is
Itanote,
very jealous.
our land, our thoughts, to be creative, Fanhongi, to have faith, to be with the things we know and the things you've come to love. Give us a moment, and we will share one together soon.
Butterflies are under my skin. I can feel the wings trembling. They would save me from falling. Waves are bringing me back to the land. 100 hands are around me, but they will save me from falling. See the
Love the ocean, protect the ocean. Ocean Positive. Swimwear made from lost or abandoned fishing nets, recycled from the sea.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to ADEX Pixel Virtual Expo. Thank you for joining us this week. And today, a very, much anticipated session, I must say. So right now, in just a few minutes later, we're going to have a session with, of course, Strikey, and he's going to get all wrapped up with Richie Kohler. So before we proceed on to that bit of portion, let me just tell you guys a little bit more of who David Strike, or casually known as Strikey. Yeah. So David Strike, or Strikey, has a background in military, commercial, recreational, and technical diving. So David is a regular speaker and also a presenter at regional and also international diving events. He's also a former field editor in Diver magazine and author of several hundred articles and about diving, and he has some books, of course, which I'm sure I'll tell you guys a little bit in a bit. And also he has been the organizer of several world-class technical diving events. David is also a fellow of the Explorers Club of New York. He also actually authored a book called Dining with Divers, Tales from the Kitchen Table, where he and Simon Pridmore work together. And also he writes an Asian Diver Scuba Guides Asia Pacific Liveaboards, which all you can find on Amazon. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to David. David, over to you.
Oh, bless you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I was actually sort of expecting Nora to also introduce my guest this evening, Richie Kohler. And I'm really tempted to say Richie is a person that needs no introduction. He is just one of the most outstanding wreck divers in the world today. To actually take a quote from the book Shadow Divers by Robert Curson, which is a wonderful book for those that can lay their hands on it. The author of the book said, if ever a person had been born to dive a Virgin U-boat, that person was Richie Kohler. And in terms of wrecks, of course, Richie just thrives on them. So let me first of all just kick off by asking Richie a little bit about his background with wreck diving, and in particular, the North Atlantic wreck divers, of which he was a member way back when. Ladies and gentlemen, Richie Kohler.
Good morning, David, and welcome. Breakfast from America. I understand that it's the other side of the world that you're in, and I just love the fact that the diving community truly spans the globe. You and I met many years ago when Carl Spencer arranged our meeting for me to present on Titanic in Australia. And I think that was the first time that you and I met. And as often happens when like-minded people get together, and with diving being the glue, if you will, that holds us together, we've maintained that friendship around the world. And so here we are. I'm having breakfast and you're having a shot of rum. And by the way, I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't be the first time you may or may not have had rum for breakfast. But to get to your question about me and diving, I started diving like I think the majority of people around the world. I'm a hobbyist, a person who went on weekend or summer holiday to just enjoy being on and around the water. When I started, I was very young. My dad gave me my introduction, if you will. My father had a small boat and would often go fishing, and in order to maintain his boat, he actually took diving lessons. Yes, for the adventure of diving, but he was a little more pragmatic. He could clean the bottom of his boat, change the propellers, and do things like that without having to pull the boat out of the water. So being a practical man, diving was a practical thing to do. I fell in love with the very idea of diving because when my dad took those lessons, the Apollo space program was going off. And like every other young man or young woman around the planet, I wanted to be an astronaut. And so for a kid who was at that time living in New York City, that's where we lived, our family, weekend holidays on the family boat and the opportunity to try my father's scuba tank, put it on my back and go off the back of our family boat was my introduction to the underwater world. Now, New York being a major harbor, a major seaport for the entire time of the existence of the United States, as you can imagine, there's many shipwrecks. And when my father would go fishing, one of the places we would often go to go fishing would be the site of a shipwreck. So even at a young age, even before having any relationship with scuba diving, I knew that there were many shipwrecks surrounding the waters of New York City. So when the opportunity afforded it, and I had my very first chance to go diving on a shipwreck, it was for the purpose to go looking for lobster. And it would take a few years because as an adolescent male with a father who was a fisherman, I looked at diving and shipwrecks as a way to continue that hobby. In other words, spearfishing, collecting lobster, picking up scallops. I guess you could say I dove for my stomach, which by the way, should be the next title for your next diving for your stomach. Yeah. So it would be probably about 10 years into my diving hobby that I was spearfishing on a shipwreck. And the shipwreck was off the coast of North Carolina. And it was a freighter called the Carib Sea. And again, I loved the idea of shipwrecks. I loved some of the story. I would read books written by other people about these incredible stories of shipwreck disasters. And while diving on that wreck, I had shot a small grouper and it went under a hull plate. Well, when I went to get the grouper out and pull my spear with the grouper out, I noticed something brass in the sand, and I pulled it out and I thought it was a pulley. It had an unusual shape. And for some reason, I kept it. And I held on to it. I didn't even have a bag to put it in because I kept all my fish on stringer. When I got back on the boat, one of the older divers said, "Hey, wow, that's pretty cool. You found a gauge." I'm like, "No, is that what this is?" And he took his knife, and I'll never forget, because back then we used to all carry knives that were about yay big. So he took this, saber out of the sheath, and he takes it, and then with the handle, he taps this gauge, and all the incrustation falls off. And it was a clock. And although the hands of the clock had rusted away, you could see where the time had stopped. And I'm getting goosebumps remembering this story because all of a sudden at that moment, literally, my life changed. Like at the stroke of the clock, I'm not kidding. Because that artifact said the name of the ship and it had the time that the ship died. And so now all of a sudden I wanted to know more about this Carib Sea and I slowly began to put down the spear gun and start looking and researching for the location of bits and pieces of shipwreck history. And that would become a driving force for literally the rest of my life. To this day, I love shipwrecks. Maybe not so much to recover artifacts, although that if it's legally, and that's a subject we could talk about, the legal recovery of things from shipwrecks. It's more about the stories. It's about the history. It's about the human drama that every shipwreck encapsulates. Yeah. So that has become a passion. It has driven my library. It has driven my activities. It has driven my focus.
You still have that clock, by the way. I see you've got a wonderful collection behind you there.
I do. It's on the wall. It's on the wall over there. Yeah. And I put a little working in it so that it'll actually keep time. So yes, I do. I've got pretty much, I never, just for the record, what I did, if we just segue a little bit into artifacts, behind me is a collection of crockery, bits and pieces of ship's china, and some cargo from shipwrecks, again, literally around the world. There's things there from the Gulf of Thailand, the English Channel, the Aegean, the Atlantic, the Pacific. So
what got you onto the Andrea Doria has been described frequently as the Everest of diving, and you've dived it numerous times, haven't you? Now,
yeah. Well, the last time I was there was in 2009. So it's been 11 years since I've visited the Andrea Doria. But prior to that, my first dive was in 1985. I was just around 26 years old. And I could barely spit in my mask. At that time, and even today, to many people, the Andrea Doria is considered the Mount Everest of diving. One of the earliest fatalities, I don't think it was the first, but I think it was the second or third, had occurred literally the week before my trip. So that was, as you can imagine, in the dive community, all the buzz. And for a young new diver about to make the most challenging dive of his career, it was in the forefront of my mind. I knew that I was ready. And even though at that time, and I think for some of our viewers, there was no term technical diving. It hadn't been created. Everything was just diving. So this was a very deep dive, and there was no training for deep diving. There was no training for wreck diving.
What sort of depth was it, Richard?
About 72 meters, so 250 feet.
Yeah.
So it was a deep dive. At that time, there was no mixed gases available to sport divers or rebreathers. So I was diving, I think you call them 11-liter tanks, twinned together, a twin set of 11-liter tanks, and spending no more than 20 minutes at a maximum depth of 70 meters. The narcosis was mind-numbing because the water is cold and dark. And of course, as many of you know, that exacerbates narcosis. You have a tendency to have a more gloomy attitude when the water visibility is limited and you're extremely cold. And so that very first dive into the Andrea Doria, that very first dive, I didn't go in, I stayed outside. The second dive, I went in and we recovered bits and pieces of the ship's crockery, which again, because I know that you love when I bring things to the forefront, it's bits and pieces like this that you would risk your life for. And I have to tell you, David, that there's nothing more crazy looking than a bunch of big burly men or women, all swathed in dive gear, coming up, taking their mask off, and then displaying teacups. So yeah, I'm that guy. I'm literally that guy, But yeah, I love these bits and pieces, and they're mementos. And so diving the Andrea Doria for the next 10 years really helped me hone in my not only confidence, because I think confidence is built by repetition, by success.
It was quite a competitive sort of dive. The boats at the time, I can remember the Tech Diver Forum, with the...
Well, I don't know what it is about the Northeast dive community here in the Northeastern United States. I'm not sure if it exists in other places in the world, but there was incredible competition amongst some of the larger charter boats, and maybe some of the smaller ones as well, to get the clients to come diving with them. And so it created, at the very best, a spirited sense of camaraderie from one boat to the other. So, you're a team Wahoo or team Seeker or that kind of things. And of course you would have shirts that have the boat's logo on it. Sometimes it would be a little bit darker, where the boat captains would give you a little bit of grief. Oh, you were diving with that guy last week. And so that was part of it. And like everything else, I think human nature is one of competition. So, if one boat found a honey hole where they were getting bits and pieces, well, the other boat would try to get there. And so sometimes it got really ridiculous, because one of the things I like to tell people when they ask about these coveted artifacts that I have is, the majority of the things that we as shipwreck divers recover, you wouldn't buy at a thrift store. You'd walk right by it. You wouldn't pay money for a broken teacup or a bent porthole. You just wouldn't do it. But once we go underwater and we become part of the story, part of the shipwreck story, this memento, if you will, this souvenir, brings that back. And every single artifact that I have, every single one, like your cookbook, has a story. Every single artifact has a story behind it. It's a moment of my life. It is a moment in time. And if I pick it up like this very cup and I hold it in my hand, I can remember the day that I got it. I can remember who I was with. I can remember where I got it. And I can remember, more importantly, that feeling that an artifact goes from being stuck in the mud or buried under a steel beam, lost, literally lost. No one could see it. But you reach your hand under that beam and you feel something, and in the muck, as the mud swirling around, you come out, and in the light of your torch, you see it reflect off of it, and you get this feeling. And I can relive that feeling every time I pick this bit up. And
with some of the people that you sort of met that went on to become lifelong friends, like John Chatterton.
Yes, I was actually on the phone with John Chatterton yesterday. And
Right.
Although I didn't tell him I'd be speaking to you, I'm going to, on his behalf, send you his regards. Again, like John Chatterton, diving brings together people from different walks of life, different, every ethnic, whether it's different ethnicity, financial backgrounds, religious, political doesn't matter. We are the most diverse collection of human beings on a dive boat. And all these people have one commonality, which is the love of diving. And then from there, we develop these friendships. John Chatterton and I have a very unique approach because, again, we met through diving. And at first, because of what you had mentioned earlier about that competitive spirit, he was on one dive boat out of New Jersey and I was on a dive boat out of Long Island, New York. And we didn't like each other simply because of that competitive spirit. And a shipwreck, a German submarine off the coast of New Jersey, kind of forced us to work together. And we created not only a lifelong friendship, but an incredible diving career. And so
this was as it was originally, the Yoo-hoo, the discovery of this German submarine that really shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, David, again, like shipwrecks, these stories are incredible. And what I mean by that is, like, every shipwreck has a story. Some sink in an act of war, some sink as a result of an accident, some sink as a storm, some sink and nobody gets hurt and it's just the loss of the ship, a mechanical failure or something along those lines. So that every one of these stories is unique unto themselves. Quite often, though, there is tragedy associated with the loss of the ship. But I think the holy grail of any shipwreck story will be one that is an enigma, one that cannot be explained, one that no expert, government, or historian can open a book or go, oh yes, this is the story. So when two truly amateur divers stumble onto a bona fide enigma, which that submarine was, you're given a gift that is incredibly rare. When you, as in this case, John Chatterton and myself and a team of other divers stumble on a virgin unknown shipwreck and then go to both the American government and the German government and to a series of the most noted at that time historical researchers regarding the Battle of the Atlantic and the German offensive against the United States with their submarines, no one can answer the question. So it fell on two blue-collar laymen, John Chatterton and myself, and again, a team of other people that were involved, to try and figure out that mystery. It was, again, like that moment when I found the clock, a defining moment in my life and in my diving career. Because as I mentioned, many divers will dive their entire life and never dive a virgin shipwreck. A shipwreck that has never been seen before by divers. It had been lost for all time until you, the diver, was the first person. So that's an incredible feeling, knowing in your heart that you're seeing something that had been lost to mankind until you found it. And then to compound that with the fact that it's on your shoulders to try and figure it out. And in the case of the Yoo-hoo, the unidentified German submarine, it took us 6 years because neither John nor I was at that time an expert on submarines. We knew how to dive shipwrecks. And submarines, as you know, David, are secretive by their very nature. A warship is supposed to be able to hide its identity. Submarines, the best of all. I mean, they literally hide underwater. And when you've got a submarine that has no external markings, no name on the back of it, no bell with the name, and it was built at the end of the war when things were going badly for Germany, and all of the materials that they were using were really, really crappy, to put to say on. I mean, they were using pot metal, they weren't using brass and bronze, and they were using plastic. So things that we should have been able to just go into the submarine and find weren't there. They had degraded, they were gone. So the wreck was beating us at every turn. And it would ultimately take 6 years to recover nothing more than a small piece of plastic, this big, that ultimately had the name of the ship on it. And with that, it gave us the ability to correct broken history or missing history.
Did that sort of, was that the start of this interest that you have in submarines particularly? Because you've taken part in a number of expeditions for researching submarines.
It really did. I mean, prior to the discovery of what was then called the Yoo-hoo in 1991, I had made maybe 2 or 3 dives on different other shipwrecks that were submarines. And although I was interested in them, I wasn't overtly fascinated with them. They're a difficult dive. An intact submarine is very difficult to access above the water. As you know, there's very small hatches, which are not friendly to divers with big scuba tanks. It's very difficult. And even inside a submarine, the confines, by their very nature to fit so much equipment inside a steel tube, are not friendly to divers. They're very tight, they're very constrictive. And when a submarine has been underwater for nearly 60 years, all of these pipes and wires are now falling down, creating entanglement hazards or limiting your ability to get around. So submarines were not, for me, something that I really wanted to dive. But after spending 6 years of our lives working on this particular submarine, John Chatterton and myself, and again, other divers, developed a unique skill set for archival research. And so once we knew how to utilize the Ministry of Defense and the U.S. archives at the U.S. Naval Historical Center, we were able to then, from there, go and locate another submarine and identify it, which is the U-215 off Canada. We identified a United States destroyer, the USS Murphy, which was lost in the approaches. I participated in a joint British and American team in 1999, formed by noted U-boat expert Innes McCartney over in England in the English Channel, where we went and located World War I and World War II U-boats. So, who
took part in that expedition? Was that was Lee and?
That is correct. It's like a rogues gallery we're discussing here. That's exactly where I met. I met Lee Bishop on that that was my first time to England in 1999 to partake in that expedition to locate and identify German World War I and World War II U-boats. Lee Bishop showed up, and in one of my favorite stories I tell about Lee, here's this guy, he shows up at the dock, and his wrist is in a cast. He had broken his wrist. He loved to dive so much, he actually had the dry suit manufacturers create a special wrist seal with a glove so he could go diving with a broken wrist. And I'm like, I love this guy. I love this guy. This guy's crazy. This guy's out of his mind. So yeah, I met Lee Bishop on that 1999 expedition, and we've been incredible friends since. And we've
and you've taken part in a number of expeditions together since then, haven't you?
That is true. A number of expeditions all around the English Channel that he put together. And in 2006, when I was organizing my first expedition to Britannic, because a little backstory, 2005, we visited Titanic. And so the next year we wanted to go to Britannic so that we could basically look at two sister ships, where Titanic is broken in 2.5 miles of Atlantic Ocean. Britannic is together, one whole piece, sitting in only 400. I know only 400 feet of water, but
well, compared with the Titanic at what, 12,000 feet or something?
That's correct. And you don't need a submersible to visit Britannic. I mean, you can, but you can dive it and you can get inside it as a diver. And so some of the questions we needed to answer about Titanic, we were looking for on her sister ship. Design questions, how she was built. Well, when I put that trip together, by this time I had known Lee, and I had met his friend, Carl Spencer, for almost 7 years. And so we had been friends, we had been diving together, and I knew that I needed Lee and Carl Spencer because both of them had participated in a number of expeditions to Britannic. So being a smart, dare I use the word smart, trying to be a smart expedition leader, you're going to pad your team with people with experience. Even if that means they have more experience than you, that it's not a competition. You want people that can help you get the mission done. So, you know, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. So we brought in Carl Spencer and Lee Bishop, and they quite literally were the savior of our expedition. I know that you've probably read my book, shameless plug, Mystery of the Last Olympian. But as Kevin Gurrid once said, and I paraphrase, it's like, any expedition to Britannic is going to be rife with failure and difficulty. It is the literal definition of the word expedition, a journey for some purpose with extreme difficulty. At that time, there were no dive shops on the island of Kea, which would be our launching point. So you had to travel, for many of our divers, across Europe, and for others across the Atlantic Ocean, get to Greece, get on a ferry, go to a small Greek island with no diving infrastructure. You had to bring everything, compressors, scuba cylinders, everything you needed to make this epic dive to 400 feet, you had to bring with you on a ferry. Invariably, things failed. I mean, I remember that the building we were using as a ad hoc dive shop could not handle the electrical requirements of our compressor. We literally fried their electricity, and I think at one point we blacked out half the island. Carl Spencer, who was a plumber, saved the day. He literally got back on the ferry, went to the Greek mainland, came back. He brought breaker boxes, wiring, everything we needed to do, and he rewired this building so that the expedition could go on. Without a compressor, we weren't diving. Subsequently, a lot of the equipment we rented was no good. And Carl Spencer introduced me to another gentleman.
What were you using, by the way, then? Had you made that switch by that stage to rebreathers?
In 2006, the Greek government would only, and to this day, will only allow closed-circuit rebreather divers to dive Britannic. Dr. Bob Ballard had let them know when he was there that scuba divers who go inside the shipwreck their exhaust bubbles are introducing oxygen into what is then an anaerobic environment. So for those who don't follow, basically the wreck is stabilized. And so if you go down with a scuba tank and your bubbles go up to the top of a compartment, they accelerate the decomposition of the ship. So they would make Britannic rot away faster. So the Greek government said, okay, we're not going to allow open circuit divers anymore. So we were mandated. And believe it or not, that was one of the many reasons why I did ultimately change from open circuit to closed circuit. Was the world of exploration underwater was becoming narrower and narrower if you only stayed on open circuit. Doesn't mean you can't go diving, doesn't mean you can't explore,
Yeah.
but my window was narrowing of opportunity where you can go, how deep you can go, and in this case, where the government said you could go. So getting back to my point, Carl introduced us when we had all of these scuba cylinders that we were filling for bailout, emergency bailout, in case our rebreathers failed. All of the tanks were leaking, they were out of hydro, they were dangerous. They were literally dangerous. I mean, we got rooked, we got really burned. Again, we didn't have enough tanks to put 12 people in the water. So Carl Spencer made a phone call, and the next day or 2 days later, this Italian fellow drives up in a van. I mean, he was like a knight in shining armor. That gentleman was Eduardo Pavia, and he came and brought us everything we needed to save our bacon, to get that 2006 expedition up and running. And again, fast friends. I've been with him. My last dive in 2009 on the Andrea Doria was with Eduardo Pavia. So.
And the Titanic, you mentioned that because you've also dived on the Titanic.
You know, David, for a guy who loves shipwrecks, right? You heard me reference the Andrea Doria as some people say it's the Mount Everest because of the difficulty to get to it, to the amount of experience that you as a diver must have. Not only experience, but confidence and ability. You know, you can't just be experienced. You've got to have the ability to make that kind of dive. It's a very physically demanding dive if the current is running, if the sea state is up, the cold, et cetera, et cetera. So deservedly, I think at that time in the late 80s and 90s, the Mount Everest nickname stuck. So if the Andrea Doria is the Mount Everest, and I told you, David, that you could go to the Titanic, it would be like going to the moon.
Yeah.
For a little kid who grew up wanting to be an astronaut, the concept of getting into this 3-meter nickel sphere that is 6 inches thick, looking through quartz ports this big, and go to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 400 miles off of Newfoundland, and look at what is arguably the most iconic, tragic, and well-known shipwreck in modern history. Everybody knows the story of Titanic. You know, they know this tragic tale of a ship of dreams bringing the wealthiest of the wealthiest, the most incredible billionaires of their time, and the most dirt poor immigrants. It is a microcosm of who we are as humanity on this ship. And it sinks on its maiden voyage on a calm night, not because of an act of war, not in a tempest or storm, but because it bumps into an iceberg on a calm, flat ocean without a ripple. And in the most bizarre tragedy, it sinks oh so slowly as the band plays on, and people have hours to make agonizing decisions. Do I get in the lifeboat? Do I stay on the big boat? Will the rescue ship get here in time? Families are separated. It speaks to people of all generations, of all backgrounds. You don't have to like or be interested in shipwrecks to know the story of Titanic, because I think it
How did you get
us.
onto? How did you manage to go diving on it? I mean, when I say diving on it, obviously in the submersible, but
at the time, John and I, because of our work on this U-boat, the story, we became part of a documentary film. We weren't the hosts or anything. We were just the subject. There was a documentary film called Hitler's Lost Sub, which told the story of John and I working on that U-boat. And it was noticed by some of the bigwigs over at A&E Television in New York City. They ran the History Channel, and they literally called us up. They got in touch with the producer of that documentary film, who gave them our number, and they invited us into New York City. They wanted to meet us, and they wanted to talk to us about shipwrecks. So at the time, John and I didn't realize that we were literally being interviewed. We didn't realize that this was like a casting call. They didn't even say that. They just said, hey, we saw your film. We're very interested in your story. Can you come in and have a cup of coffee? So we went in and they asked us questions like, hey, what's your, if you could go anywhere, where would you want to go? What is a really cool shipwreck story? And as I think you're aware, David, it's like when I talk about shipwrecks, I'm quite adamant. I become quite passionate. It is truly in my DNA. And John is the same way, where it's very different people, but we have that commonality in our passion towards shipwrecks. So John and I work off each other, just talking back and forth. And it was almost as if at one point that there was nobody else in this big boardroom around the table. It was John and I going through a wish list of, oh boy, if we can go anywhere, I'd go here. We talked a little bit about the stories. At the end of that meeting, we didn't even get coffee. They didn't even give us coffee. I think we had cups of water. I know, cheap. And they said, thank you very much and have a nice day. And John and I got back in the car and we're driving back. And we're like, you realize we even had to pay for our own parking. They didn't even buy us a cup of coffee. God, those guys. And the phone rings. They call us up and they offer us to do 5 episodes of a brand new television show called Deep Sea Detectives. Well, neither one of us, aside from being part of a documentary film about the U-boat, had ever been an actor or known anything about television filmmaking. And this was going to be decidedly different, where when you're the subject of a documentary, people ask you questions and you talk to a human being and they film you from the side. As a host of a television program, you have to talk to the camera the way I'm talking to you right now. You have to be emotive, you have to be passionate. And John and I, we're divers. We can't remember anything, so we can't read a script, but we can remember bullet points and we love history. So we found a way to be, I think, entertaining. I like to think that we've been entertaining. Obviously, we fooled someone because that 5 episodes of Deep Sea Detective ultimately turned into over 50. And so we
went around the world as well. We've seen around the world.
That is correct. And so when you work for television, and we were for 4 years or 4 seasons, we had a hit television program on the History Channel. And we did, as you said, travel around the world doing not just shipwrecks. We did cave diving. We did basically, if it was an underwater mystery, airplanes, trains, for God's sake, at the bottom of a lake or in the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. We found trains with no shipwreck around it, which is another great story. So we like to bring these stories to people to promote not only diving, but, history and get people interested in that. And when you work for television, people write you emails, people call you with ideas. And one person that we had met in the dive community was a gentleman. He was a Pennsylvania attorney who had a very unique relationship to Titanic. He was the legal counsel for the company called RMS Titanic that was recovering artifacts legally from the Titanic that most of us around the world now have seen with the traveling museum showing these bits and pieces they picked up. That gentleman, David Concannon, had contacted us and said that he had a theory that when he was diving, he had saw something that may explain why Titanic sank as quickly as it was. Well, we loved his idea, and we went to the History Channel and we said, hey guys, we think this is going to make a great show. And they loved it. Oh my God, did they love it? Until they heard the price tag. The charter fee, which was discounted, by the way, because James Cameron had just finished shooting Ghost of the Abyss. And so the ship, the Keldysh, which is the support vessel for the 2 Mir submersibles, was already in Newfoundland. So what that meant was, instead of us having to pay for them to bring this huge Russian ship all the way from Europe to America and then get set up for the dive operations, we already had somebody who paid for that. So basically, a charter that would have been over $1 million for almost a week and a half or 2 weeks would only cost us only $300,000. That's a bargain, right? Well, the History Channel thought it was too much money. Without a guarantee that they would have a winner, that we would find anything, they just didn't want to plunk down $300,000 for a dive charter. Well, needless to say, Chatterton and I were upset. I mean, how do you get, if you're a diver who really loves shipwreck opportunities and histories, how do you allow that to go away? How do you say, oh yeah, oh shucks, we're not going to do it? So both John and I mortgaged our houses to come up each with $100,000. And then we went to a television producer who we had been working with, a guy named Kirk Wolfinger, convinced him that this is a great idea. So now we had $300,000 cash. And I got to tell you, nothing was more nerve-wracking than me back in 2004 wiring $100,000 to a Russian bank account and hoping that this wasn't some kind of scam. So yeah, it's like you go to the bank and you like sign in it and you're like, yeah, here you go. I hope this really works out. So we did it. We chartered the vessel and we went out there, and we had, again, much like I described with Britannic, we brought with us incredibly talented people from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to put their high-def cameras on board the Russian submersibles. And with that, we knew we were getting experts like Clark Stevenson, people who had worked not only with James Cameron, but in the case of a gentleman called Billy Lang was literally on board with Dr. Ballard when Titanic was found. He was the gentleman looking at the monitor who screams out, that's it, when he saw the boiler. So technically we had as part of our team, the person who literally was the first eyeball, the first person to recognize that they had located the wreck of Titanic. So when you've got that kind of talent with you, opportunities afford themselves. Unfortunately, what David's theory didn't pan out. But like every good, wreck diver, you drop back and punt. To use an American football euphemism. So we went to the experts like Clark Stevenson and Bill Lang, and said, well, what can we do out here? I mean, we don't want to just take pretty pictures. We want to try and contribute to the story. We want to go somewhere and see things maybe that no one's ever imaged. And Billy Lang gave us that opportunity to be outside the box, to go further away from the wreck than anyone else had ever gone with the submarines, in an effort to find the pieces of steel that came off the ship from the impact with the ice, if there was to be found. And I don't want to talk too much about that story, but we did. We found what was called the missing pieces of the bottom of Titanic. And we made a series of programs about that for the History Channel. They ultimately came back and bought the program. And that's how I wound up going to Britannic, was to continue to tell the story of Titanic. So,
and the submersible, the pilot was Dimitri, was?
We had, Dimitri, that you're thinking of from AQ Films or from the U-boat group from Malta. Right. We dove with him in the Triton submersible on Britannic. And, that gives me a nice segue to say, like you, David, I have seen some incredible growth in what we call diving, technical diving, in my lifetime, in my 40 years or over 40 years of diving experience. The advent of diving computers versus using tables, the integration of commercial and military diving equipment and techniques and materials like Trimix or closed circuit rebreathers into the sport diving world, expanding our ability. And of course, I don't want to say the technological revolution, but the technological explosion that has occurred in diving, and where now divers can use DPVs or scooters to widen their ability to search a larger area underwater, or in the cave community, to, instead of being limited to how far you can swim, now doing these incredible penetrations of miles, like the stuff that Jill does, miles underwater on a scooter in the cave. This was something not even on the radar, not even imaginable when I was a kid. And to get to the point, here I am in a submersible with Dmitry Tomashov and his father, and we go out with them on their boat, which is the U-boat Navigator, and we're making dives on Britannic that Lee Bishop coined the phrase. He called it the $1 million dive. And it's not because it cost $1 million to make the dive, although we had millions of dollars of equipment. But what he meant was, in one fell swoop, we had in one shot that, let's say, Mike Barnett or Lee or Eduardo had taken with their still camera or video camera, we had 4 people in 2 different submersibles. We had 4 divers on scooters. We had a diving bell as an emergency habitat in case there was a diving accident or emergency. And we had a full-sized ROV, like, a dog on a rope following our divers. So these divers made a circumnavigation. They went around the entire Britannic, followed by 2 submarines and an ROV. And knowing that if there was a problem with one of their rebreathers, we had a diving bell where they can get out of the water and do their decompression. This is something like out of the movie, The Abyss. And I remember that when we came up from one of our first dives in the diving bell, Evan Kovacs, my good friend and gosh, lifelong underwater videographer and certainly an incredible
fortune-telling parrot hunter.
Yes, and fellow parrot hunter, turned to me and he said, "Dude, this is like science fiction." And I know it sounds glib, but I literally turned to him and go, "No, dude, this is science fact. We just did this." And he's like, "Yeah, we were so stoked." So yeah, here we were living something that a few years ago we had seen in the movie The Abyss. Literally, like in that movie The Abyss. You had diving bells, divers, submersibles, all of this equipment for the purpose of searching and recovering, if you will, history, not necessarily in physical artifacts, but in imagery and in knowledge. So it's just been an incredible ride this last 40 years. And I can only imagine, David, what the next generation of underwater explorers are going to have, in their toolbox to go further.
Yeah. What, just back on an earlier expedition you were on with Lee and the one organized by Carl, the 2009. And I think you were, and Richie Stevenson were actually underwater at the time, weren't you? What was it? The Fireman's Tunnel, I think you were.
It was,
which in itself was at a personal level, I was sweating reading about it.
The culmination of 3 prior expeditions to Britannic were formed on that 2009 trip that was put together by Carl Spencer. It was a National Geographic aggressive film project that was going to have Dr. Bob Ballard as part of it. Dr. Ballard was going to be doing submarine operations or, ROV operations on Titanic. We were going to be doing manned dives on Britannic, and they were going to combine this into a program. It was incredibly aggressive, and Carl Spencer honored me by inviting me to be part of what he referred to as a dream team. He put together a series of divers from around the world, international dive team of different abilities. I mean, we had Jared Jablonski out there, who's a noted cave and GUE explorer. Yep. He was going to be going into an area of very, very, very deep inside the wreck that no one had ever been to, called the Turkish Baths. Richie Stevenson, who was the gentleman who originally discovered the Fireman Tunnel, was going to go with me. So Richie had discovered it, and then John and I had gone further than anybody, and now we were going to go back and try to answer what, as you know, having read the book, the mystery of the last Olympian. Why did the ship sink so fast? We wanted to find out if certain watertight doors were open or closed.
Yeah.
And so Richie and I were tasked with that. And again, incredible honor I had known Richie, I'd worked with him on other expeditions, incredibly talented and experienced pioneer, if you will, in shipwreck and underwater imaging. And again, it's one thing to say you dive that deep and you go that far inside a shipwreck. It's another thing to do all of that and carry a camera the size of a small lawnmower, push it through the wreck. So believe me, when these cameramen get down there and they've got to deal with all of that and make the same dive, my hat's off to them. Yeah. So Richie and I were literally making the dive of our lifetime. It was one of those moments in my life where I literally went from being at the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, because after the conclusion of that dive, we surfaced to find out that Carl Spencer, while working at trying to recover the Marconi radio out of the radio room on Britannic, had a rebreather malfunction of some kind, and due to a gas mix-up, an error, a human error of his own making, had died. And he wasn't even on the boat. By the time Richie and I had surfaced, finished our decompression, which was about 8 hours in the water, we had come up and we were, prior to getting on the boat, elated. We were elated. We had figured it out. We had solved the mystery. And when we got back on the boat, there was like no one there. We didn't understand what was going on, because normally when you would ascend and get on the boat, they would be there with the camera. They would be asking you questions, but none of that. There was just some crew members helping us get undressed. And Billy Lang, the gentleman that I had mentioned earlier that I worked with on Titanic, was a member of Carl's team from Woods Hole, and he came over to me and he said he's gone. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I go, what? He goes, and then he starts to cry, and the pain expression comes on his face. He realizes, I have no idea. And he told me Carl had died, and that he had been taken off. He had, in an effort to try and save him, they put him on a Hellenic Navy helicopter and sent him to Athens, but he had never recovered.
Yeah.
And I can remember, David, it was worse than a punch in the gut. It just took everything out of me. I just felt like the weight of that entire boat just on my shoulders. And I can remember just sitting there in my dry suit on the deck, just trying to, I said good morning to him. We had breakfast together. He had come over and gave us a fist bump when Richie and I were about to go in the water, and said, not today's the day, but something along those lines. Like, today you're going to do it. I know you're going to do it. We're going to make this happen. And, and that's the way I want to remember him. That's the way I do remember him, is that smile, that incredible, infectious enthusiasm and positive. The guy was the most positive person that I've ever met. And it's tragic. And so, that 2009 expedition is incredibly bittersweet for me on many levels.
Just, you also mentioned Bob Ballard, and you've done a lot of work, or did some work with Ballard as well, didn't you? In the Gulf of Mexico?
I did get to work with Bob Ballard in the Gulf of Mexico. What happened was I was working for National Geographic Television. I was requested to be Dr. Ballard's U-boat expert. Just want you to hold on to that for a minute. Just wrap your brain around that for a second. The guy who found Titanic, the guy who found Bismarck, the guy who has been one of the, if not the most successful underwater explorers for deep ocean shipwrecks. Not only that, there's a whole other side to Bob Ballard that only now, as military secrets are being allowed to be told, whole other side to him, revolving around underwater espionage and the Cold War. That's incredible. The backstory to Bob Ballard is incredible. The work that he's doing now on the Nautilus, basically doing live streams from underwater, not just shipwrecks, but underwater seamounts, volcanoes, all kinds of underwater research that he's doing that's promoting a whole new generation of underwater I can't remember the word. It's not telemarketing, but it's telepresence. So basically, high school and college students can be live with Dr. Ballard while he's on his ship out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, looking at some anomaly at the bottom of the ocean, having that interface right there. It's incredible. So I was requested or offered to be his expert on a Type 9C U-boat, the only one that had been lost in the Gulf of Mexico during World War II. He was going to go there and do a program on, the attack against America, and focus on this one, which is one of the most intact due to the fact that it's down 5,000 feet, just over 1,500 meters in a very anaerobic area. The wreck is in incredible condition. Some of the wood is still on the decking, and we never see that on German U-boats. Some of the exterior, very thin steel, because it's no oxygen at that level, the steel is still there. So things and features that you will never see on a U-boat sunk in shallow water are right there. It almost looks like you could, dust off the silt and start the engine in some cases. So incredible imagery, and to sit next to Dr. Ballard and have this man asking me, what's that? What do you think of this? What are your thoughts? Was a highlight of my career. And to be honest with you, the funny thing about opportunity and being in the right place at the right time, I don't always say the right thing, David, but I remember mentioning in a very offhand comment to Dr. Ballard, not on camera, by the way. We were off camera, and I said to him, the Navy captain who sank this U-boat got screwed over. And he goes, actually, the words I used was got shafted. I said to Dr. Ballard, this Captain Claudius got shafted by the Navy. He goes, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, after he attacked the submarine and sank it, the reason why it was lost for so long was the Navy didn't believe he sank it. They believed he botched the attack. And the reason for this was 2 days later, an air patrol attacked another submarine about 100 miles away. So to the Navy, it seems like, okay, the submarine that Captain Claudius attacked got away, didn't get damaged. And 100 miles away, that's not that far in the whole Gulf of Mexico. What they didn't know was there was actually 2 submarines operating in the Gulf. And had they known that, they may have put it together. So they took away Captain Claudius's command. They took his ship away. The guy had just killed a German U-boat in the Gulf of Mexico and rescued the crew of a ship that had a torpedo. He was a hero. Instead, they took his ship away. They sent him back to school, and they admonished him for not conducting the attack correctly. The man, unfortunately, died never knowing that he had done it right. He died of old age. He did have a good career. He ultimately rose to a rear admiral in the U.S. Navy, but he still went to the grave thinking that he had done it wrong because the Navy told him he did it wrong. When I told this to Dr. Ballard, Dr. Ballard originally had been in the Navy, and one of his schoolmates from Annapolis was now a rear admiral and the head of the Atlantic Fleet. And he called him up, and the wheels of justice moved slowly. But a few months later, I was invited to the U.S. Navy, to the Pentagon, to the offices of the United States Navy at the highest military level. And our Secretary of the Navy awarded Captain Claudius's son his father's Legion of Merit with a V for valor, because it was conducted in combat, posthumously, of course. And I was able to stand in that room with the Secretary of Navy and listen to the family be happy that, again, I was part of correcting a little bit of broken history.
That must have been a very warming sort of feeling.
It really is, David. Yeah. And again, when I tell people that the real treasure in shipwrecks is the story, this is another one of those examples where we as divers can really make a difference in other people's lives.
Now, I think Nora was indicating that we're nearly out of time.
It goes quick, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Mate, I didn't even get to ask you about the Dark Water series.
Well,
the Perseus Survivor. I saw that it's a docudrama, isn't it?
Yep.
Historical docudrama. And it was just superb.
The people at AQ Films are doing an incredible job, David. So far, we're halfway through the series. Obviously, like everything else, this horrible plague, if you will, or pandemic, has basically shut down all filmmaking, and as well as travel, as you're aware. I mean, we can't even travel. So I have to say that it's on hold because we've got more to shoot, and until we can get back together, and this is
there's a full range of things that you've got planned there, isn't there? I think what was one of them, the Loch Ness monster, and
I can neither confirm nor deny these allegations. How much rum you been sipping while I've been talking there, buddy?
I had. I was going to share with you. Tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the stopping of Todd in the Royal Navy. So I was actually
a black day for sailors in the Royal Navy.
Yep. So this is for you.
I'm going to raise my glass.
Richie, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's great to see you again.
Awesome. Cheers.
God, that's good.
I bet it is. I wish I was there to have a snort with
you. You thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yep. So do we have any Q&A before we call it a day?
Well, there's Nora. Do we have any time left, or?
We do have one. We do have time for just one question, unfortunately. So we have one here. Well, actually two. One is from Shah Naeem from Sri Lanka. He said that when are the both of you going to join him to dive in the Maldives?
That chef.
Yeah.
How you doing, buddy? Him and I have that same hairstyle. I love that boy. He is my brother from another mother.
Yeah, he did say that, Richie, and then he said that yours is shinier.
I believe he is correct with that. Well, David, when are we going to pack? I think it's a shorter journey for you, isn't it? Or is it the same? I think for me, it's like 22 hours to get to the Maldives.
It's probably, it's closer for us here. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
That was actually the site of my first wonderful salvage operation there.
Okay.
What did you get?
Yeah. So, Nora.
Yeah. So the next question is that based on your bucket list, maybe, is there any best dive that you have for wreck diving, for cave diving, and also for leisure dive?
Wow, all of those in one, huh? Okay, let's start with wreck diving. I love all diving, and what I mean by that is it doesn't have to be very, very deep. People think that because I love technical diving and diving over a rebreather, therefore it always has to be deep. There are wrecks in the Dry Tortugas off Florida. There are wrecks off of the coast of Georgia, here again in the United States. One of my favorite places in the entire world to dive for shipwrecks is the English Channel. Most people don't think of the English Channel as a resort diving destination, but if you want to dive into history, the waters surrounding England have been visited by ships since the Roman Empire. I mean, literally, since the Roman Empire. And, 2 world wars, multiple accidents, fog, storms. There's just a plethora, if you will, of diverse types of underwater shipwrecks to be explored. And I love it. I love the environment. I love the dive community. In the height of summer, the water is relatively warm. It's not Caribbean or Pacific Ocean warm, but it is warm by my standards. So I love diving in the English Channel. Cave diving I love as well. And one of the best cave dives that I've had have been in the Dominican Republic. There's great cave dives all around the world. I've been diving in Mexico and Florida. I've even dived in sea caves in the Pacific Ocean. There's something about the Dominican Republic, and I guess because I'm an American and because that's where Columbus landed, the relationship between the indigenous people, the Tainos, and the fact that they had written in these caves and that their artifacts, the last vestige of a lost civilization, are at the bottom of these caves, for me, combines the beauty of incredible cave diving and, again, that human story, that part of history that we as cave divers can only see by going down to the bottom of these cenotes. So I really love diving in the Dominican Republic. And then fun or resort diving, you know, every couple of years I like to take a liveaboard and go into the Bahamas and just go up to the Exumas or Eleuthera on the other side and basically just have a great week of nothing more than, you know, maximum 30-meter dives, maximum depth, just filming sharks, coral reefs, and just enjoying being underwater, blowing bubbles, being on open circuit and blowing bubbles. So those are the three.
Thank you for answering the question, Richie, and thank you, David, for actually assisting us with this. And I must say, I really enjoy your life story and also your challenges and also your crockery at the back.
Thank you.
And before we end off, I just want to give a shout out to those who actually, you know, commented on this live stream post. And we do have a big shout out from David Street to the both of you. Chef, of course, Miko Pasi, Yvonne Press, and also Jeffrey Glenn all the way from Gold Coast. And yes, one more, and that's Jane Jenkins.
Oh, right. Who's going to be one of the guests at a future occasion?
Yeah. So they both said hi, and then and they also said thank you for sharing the story as well.
And
thank you all.
Regrettably, we've run out of time, so you can't hear us do our karaoke.
Yeah.
But I understand that next year we may be live in Singapore.
Yes.
I just hope things goes well with COVID. No more third wave, second wave. Yeah. So if not, then we look forward to seeing both of you in ADEX in Singapore.
Excellent.
Nora, thank you. Richie, mate, thank you so much. And I do look forward to chatting with you again soon and catching up live and tracking down that fortune-telling parrot.
Eventually, we will find that parrot.
We will. Mate, you take care. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.